Pastor Sam Aylestock became my uncle-in-law in 2002, August 24, 2002. And I remember for the first time meeting him at his home while we were dating. And I was working at a camp on the east side of Pennsylvania, High Point Camp. And one weekend came over to his home and got a chance to get away. And I remember him sizing me up, thinking, who is this guy that is going to date or is dating my niece? And somehow I passed mustard there and made it through. He has been a great help to me in ministry over the years, being able to call and just to see what God is doing. He was a youth pastor for many years of his ministry, and that's for 8 years. Before coming to here, I was a youth pastor as well, and I would at times call him and say, what do you do when a teen does this? I had a teen just jump off of a railing and over at a teen activity onto the trampoline and do this or that, and just different things. We're going to talk through ministry, and he had put me on some material that he had wrote years ago called A to Z for new believers, some discipleship material. And then he also wrote an A to Z for teens, for discipling teenagers, and began to use that. In fact, I, in one time with my Sunday school class for teenagers, I taught through that material for 2 years. Took our teenagers through that, and been excellent materials. Has had a heartbeat to serve the Lord, has planted churches. He planted a church in Canada, and then has been now for 22 years at Valley Forge Baptist Temple over in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. And God has used Pastor Aylestock in a great way. His wife, Susan, is also here with us, and delight to have her. And so I want you to welcome them, but thank you for coming and teaching us. He taught last night in our discipleship course, and then taught some more this morning in Sunday school. If you would like more information on that, maybe you were not able to make it, we have recorded all of the sessions, last night's sessions, this morning Sunday school, and then recording this morning. And if you would like to get those recordings, you can put a request in, and we will get those to you and help you make available that to you as well. But I'm excited to have him come and speak. So Pastor Aylestock, would you come at this time?
It is a pleasure to be with you this morning. And I well remember when Pastor Shipe, Greg Shipe, came to my house that time. And I probably shouldn't say it, but he... Should I say it? I am sizing him up, when he's there. He's interested in my niece, so, I'm looking out for her. I'm concerned for her. And I noticed he had around his ankle, he had this little ropey thing. You remember that? He had this little ropey thing out there. What is this little anklet thing he's got? So then I'm really looking at him close. And what a blessing. What a blessing what God has done through the Shipe family in previous work and now here. And the heart that they have. And my wife and I to be with their family and to watch the kids and observe the family in operation together. It's a good testimony, and it is a blessing to see how a family should be for God. We need that across the land in America. I'm sitting here on the front row, and I'm listening to you folks sing. And it just warms my heart to know there's congregations scattered throughout this land where people love God. It gives me hope for America. We can have another great awakening. There can be another revival that starts in the house of God. And multitudes turn to Christ. And if we don't have God in all this, not only are we in trouble individually, our families are in trouble, our nation's in trouble. We need God. The nation, the individuals, families, churches. It is all about God. We need Him. We're going to look at a passage this morning in Isaiah And the Apostle Paul, if he was traveling around today and preaching, if it was today like it was in his day, he preached out of the Old Testament. You know that, right? Out of the Old Testament. He preached out of the Old Testament because the New Testament wasn't written. It was being written. And so when the Bible says in the book of, and don't turn there, but when it says in the book of Romans, for whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the Scriptures might have hope. The things that are written aforetime, he's referring to the Old Testament there. And so the early church, those early Christians would open up the Old Testament scrolls and they would study the Old Testament. And they would search for God in the Old Testament. They would learn all that God had for them from the Old Testament. And so I want to look this morning in the Old Testament. Some years ago, I decided that I was going to have my daily devotions out of those parts of the Bible that were more mysterious to me. Not because that they are mysterious, but because I hadn't invested enough time in study and meditation on those passages. And so consequently, I went through a 2-year period of time where every day I lived with Isaiah. I listened to Isaiah talk. I spent time walking where he was walking and reading his burdens and listening to his musings and sensing his heartbeat. You spend 2 years with a guy reading what he recorded, and you feel like you get to know him a little bit. And I spent this time with Isaiah, and I want to share with you some of what was going on in his heart. He ministered during a time of national decline. The nation was secularizing as they moved further and further spiritually away from God. And the followers of Jehovah in the nation were being marginalized. And if they were drifting, the followers of Jehovah God, if they were drifting at a much slower pace than the people around them. It eventually blossomed into full-fledged persecution. Faith was waning. Wickedness was growing. Not only is distrust in God growing in Isaiah's time, but disbelief is becoming the national norm. Israel was still worshiping, but they're worshiping a lot of other things. Israel was worshiping money. Israel was worshiping their possessions and power. And they placed a high premium on leisure. But she was not worshiping Jehovah God. And in the midst of this growing hostility to spiritual truth stands a man. And he stands there faithful, and he stands there undaunted, and he delivers every "Thus saith the Lord" that God gave him. So God said to Isaiah, "Thus saith the Lord," gave Isaiah a message, and Isaiah delivered it to the people. He's committed to telling the truth to the people, God's truth. And now that is the pleasure of the man of God, or that is the plight of the man of God, depending upon how the people would receive it. Isaiah speaks truth. The man of God speaks truth. He speaks it in love. He speaks it in spite of what the receptivity is. You just have to say the truth. And you pray that there'll be enough to listen to that truth to have an impact. He's preaching, but unfortunately, Israel is not listening. I see some striking parallels between Isaiah's nation and our own. And you probably have already been thinking about that as I was just giving an introduction there. Many of us in this auditorium, many of us grew up in a more moral America. Right? We did. Yeah. I grew up through my childhood in the late 50s and and childhood was in the early 60s, in the mid-60s. By the time I hit the end of the 60s, I was in high school. I grew up in Northern Virginia. Back then it was farm country, though we were really in the shadow of the nation's capital. I attended public school. I attended public school where there was respect for authority. That was the norm. There was spankings for misbehavior, and I can tell you for sure that that was the case, particularly in second grade. There was a lot of misbehavior. There was daily prayer. There was daily prayer over the public address system of the school, and the school principal, Mrs. Hamby, led in prayer for the entire student body. That's the way it was. And then after a prayer, we would stand by our desks. We would place hand over heart, and we would pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and we would say the whole pledge, including one nation under God. And nobody thought to say, unconstitutional. You can't do that. They didn't say that about the prayer. They didn't say that about the pledge. That's just the way life was. There was a love for America. There was a love for the founding fathers. They were revered as heroes. We watched a film series in school. This was in elementary school. The film series was entitled Profiles in Courage. Now, it was a series of films that was made from the book of the same name, Profiles in Courage, that was written by then Senator John F. Kennedy. We were taught to appreciate the good points in the lives of the founding fathers, and they had many good points, and they made sacrifices, and they gave their full measure of devotion, and we just learned to appreciate them. Their flaws, though they had them, their flaws were not magnified and laughed and scoffed at. It was all their positive points that was magnified and appreciated. See, we do a really good job in America today of taking maybe a good man and a good woman that has 20 good points and a bad point, and we magnify the bad point. And we talk about it, and we elevate it, and we extrapolate on it, and we talk about it so much that people learn to dislike the person that had all these good points because they had a bad point. And who among us doesn't have some bad points, and we struggle with sin, and it burdens us when we sin. It bothers us. And we get on our knees and we ask God to forgive us, and we want to make it right. And I mean, that's just life. That's the way it is for us. Though we are believers, we are not perfected. We're not perfect. But that's coming one day. We looked at it last night, and when Jesus comes, we shall be like Him, for we shall see Him as He is. And there's coming a day that He completely eradicates from us all the vestiges of sin that's a part of our very nature. But that's the future. Today we struggle with it. You know, back then, there were cigarette commercials. And I remember the old Virginia Slims cigarette commercial. They had this tagline: "You've come a long way, baby. You've come a long way, baby." A long way down. A long way that we've traveled as a nation has not brought joy. It has not brought peace. It has not brought contentment. We're living in a nation that is moving away from God. But we are living in a nation that God can completely control and do whatever He wants to in. And so I don't lose heart. God is still on the throne. Let me set the stage a little bit for our message here. I should have asked you which button I'm supposed to push. Which way do I point it? To the right. The right button. Ah, it worked. Lesson number 1. Get your instructions before you get up here to preach, right? All right, so let's... I do best in learning the Bible when I can see things, when I can visualize things. So I'm just giving you some maps up here. Israel and Judah. Northern kingdom, southern kingdom. North of Israel was Samaria. And then this territory here, which is modern Iraq, but back in this day, it was Assyria. That is the growing nation. Assyria. Assyria is located in this river valley right up here between the Tigris and the Euphrates River. And when Assyria comes to Israel, they come up the river valley and down. So this geographical description here is called the Fertile Crescent. And the armies would follow this way because they're following the water to get to the place that they're going. Assyria is to their east. Israel's east. And that's the way it's referred to in the scripture. It's sometimes to the north. It is northeast. Assyria is growing. They're gobbling up other nations around them and peoples around them, and they're gobbling them up because they can. They're getting powerful. And when they start getting surrounding Syria, Syria gets nervous. Syria forms a confederation with Israel. They say, let's go in together. We've got to unite and pull our strength, our resources together, because we have to withstand Assyria. And so they work together in a coalition. Down here is Egypt. Well, what happens is Assyria engulfs Syria, and Assyria engulfs Israel, carries Israel away, disperses them throughout the Assyrian Empire. And now, this is the scene in the passage that we're reading. This is where we're at. And Isaiah is living in Judah, the southern kingdom of Judah. Egypt is over here, but Assyria is a powerful and a brutal people to their north. Isaiah may have felt dismay. And we read his feelings in chapters 30 and 31. He's delivering a prophecy to Israel. And he really is chiding Israel for their folly of trusting in Egypt to ward off the advancing Assyrian threat. You know, human nature doesn't change too much. It's so easy for us to trust other things other than God. And when all else fails, pray, right? When all else fails, trust God. And that is not the right way to live. It shouldn't be when all else fails. God shouldn't be He's not our last resort. God is our first resource. So we don't look at life and shouldn't look at life when everything else doesn't work. Okay, now I'm going to try God. I'm going to see if God can do it. And we should turn to God first. In Isaiah 30, verse 1, woe to the rebellious children, saith the Lord, that take counsel, but not of me, and that cover with a covering, but not of my spirit, that they may add sin to sin, that walk down to go into Egypt, and have not asked at my mouth to strengthen themselves in the strength of Pharaoh, and to trust in the shadow of Egypt. Now, in your handout, I have a question here, a couple questions, or a question with a couple of answers. The question is this: what did Israel do that was wrong in the passage? What did they do that was wrong? Number one is this: Israel listened to the wrong counsel. They listened to the wrong counsel. So would you fill that in? They listened to the wrong counsel. It says, woe unto the rebellious children, saith the Lord, that take counsel, but not of me. Israel is seeking counsel, but they're not seeking counsel from God. They're political leaders, the movers and shakers of the nation that is leading the nation. These political leaders, well, they want the nation to turn to Egypt for help. When you listen to the wrong people and not God, you know what happens? You carry out the wrong plans, but not God's plans. And that is Isaiah's day when the nation is looking to the wrong counsel. They're looking down to Egypt. What did they do that was wrong? Number 2, Israel sought cover from the wrong resource. They sought strength from Pharaoh, strength from Egypt. They were trusting, God says this, you're trusting in the shadow of Egypt. Egypt is just a shadow of what she was. Egypt is not in her glory days. And so you're trusting in a nation that doesn't have the strength. Why would Israel trust in Egypt when faced with the Assyrian threat? Well, the reasons are given to us in chapter 31. So let's look over there. Chapter 31 starts out like this. Woe to them that go down to Egypt for help. Why, Israel, are you going down to Egypt for help? And stay on horses and trust in chariots, because they are many, and in horsemen, because they are very strong. But they look not unto the Holy One of Israel, neither seek the Lord. But Egypt, they may have had chariots, and they had horses, and they had horsemen, and Israel is looking to them because they have weaponry. They have stuff that looks like strength, and so they're trusting in Egypt. But Egypt's not going to be able to help them. Let's go back to chapter 30. Look with me in verse 3. Here's what God's sizing this up. Here's what he's saying. Therefore shall the strength of Pharaoh be your shame. It's going to be a shame to you. The trust and the trust in the shadow of Egypt is going to be your confusion. Oh, they're really not going to help you. Verse 5. They were all ashamed of a people that could not profit them, nor be a help nor profit, but a shame and a reproach. Could God be clearer here? Israel, you're going down to Egypt and you're going to trust in them, but they are a people that cannot profit you. They will not help you. They're going to be a shame and a reproach. Look in verse 7. For the Egyptians shall help in vain and to no purpose. Therefore I cried concerning this. And here's what Isaiah cries. Their strength, talking about Egypt, their strength is to sit still. Egypt is a do-nothing strength. They're not going to do anything. They're not going to be able to help you. You go down to Egypt, you put your faith, your trust there. They will not help. They have no strength. They will do nothing. Let's go to chapter 31 again. Look in verse 3. Now the Egyptians are men, and not God, and their horses flesh, and not spirit. When the Lord shall stretch out his hand, both he that helpeth, that's Egypt, and shall fall, and he that is helping or holpen is Israel, shall fall down. They shall fail together. Okay, Israel, you go down to Egypt and you put your trust in them, and you think they're going to help you, and they're going to deliver you from the Assyrians. Understand this: you're both going down. Both of you. They cannot help. So why did Israel trust in Egypt when they faced the Assyrian threat? Egypt had horses. Egypt had chariots. Egypt had horsemen. But here's another reason, and this is even more devastating. Israel did not know God. Would you fill that in your notes? They didn't know God. You cannot trust in a God that you do not know. You have to know the Lord. You have to spend time with the Lord. You have to walk with the Lord. You have to communicate with the Lord. You have to cultivate a relationship with God. If you don't do that and you don't know God, you will not turn to a God you don't know. You cannot turn to a God that you've not heard about. And there's too many in Israel's land that didn't even know about God. There's only one hope for a nation in decline. Turn and trust in God. That is the only hope for any nation. That is the hope for any family. That is the hope for any individual. Turn and trust in God. God is the answer. And it is the people of God who know the answer. Our last president did not know the answer for America. And that's not a political statement. He just didn't know the answer. And after 8 years of administration, we're more divided than we ever have been. Our current president, he may not know the answer either. I don't know. I don't know how much he knows. And he's so early in his administration, it's too hard to evaluate. But it may be that he doesn't know the answer either. The answer really is God. The answer is God's people turning to God and knowing God and living for God. Our senators, our representatives, they do not know the answer for America. Now, I'm not saying none of them do, but as a body, they don't. Our judges do not know the answer for America. Our educators, for sure, do not know the answer for America. But Bible-believing and Bible-reading Christians do know the answer for America. And the answer for America is God. In the book, The End of Christendom, author Malcolm Muggeridge made this powerful observation. And let me read to you from his book. He wrote, "I conclude that generations, like every other human creation, wax and wane. Civilizations wax and wane. By the nature of the case, there can never be a lasting civilization any more than there can be a lasting spring or lasting happiness or an individual life or a lasting stability in a society. It is in the nature of man and of all that he constructs to perish, and it must ever be so. The world is full of the debris of past civilizations, and others are known to have existed which have not left any debris behind them, but have just disappeared." Now, isn't that true? All of the civilizations of the debris left. He goes on to say, whatever their ideology may be, from the Garden of Eden onward, such dreams of lasting felicity have cropped up and no doubt always will. But the realization is impossible for the simple reason that a fallen creature like man, though capable of conceiving perfection and aspiring after it, is in himself and in his works forever imperfect. Though he is fated to exist in the no man's land between the perfection he can conceive and the imperfection that characterizes his own nature and everything he does. Nations rise and nations fall. Every nation has followed this progression from bondage to bondage. Nations rise and nations fall. Every nation goes through the cycle from bondage to bondage. The nations of this century will be no different. But let us not accept the Marxist notion that these are fixed and intractable laws of history. Christians can point to unusual times when revival has redirected the inexorable decline of a civilization. In the Old Testament, Jonah saw revival, postponed God's judgment on Nineveh. In the 16th century, Martin Luther and John Calvin saw a Protestant Reformation transform Europe. And even in the history of the United States, the First and Second Great Awakenings changed individuals and society. But apart from God's intervention, nations will decline and eventually pass off the scene. Much of the Old Testament records the history of the nation of Israel. It passed through these same stages, and so will every country in the world. As Christians, we must recognize that nations will rise and fall as individuals will be born and die. Our civilization will not last indefinitely, but will eventually pass off the scene. Only God's Word endures forever. We should not pour our trust in the things of this world, for they are destined for destruction. Instead, we should put our faith in God and His Word. Now, you can listen to that and you can find despair. Or I can listen to that and I can find hope. Because hope is, there is a God who sits on the throne and He's in control of His creation. He has believers in this country as well as other countries. He wants to do something through the lives of believers. He wants to turn a nation to God, to Himself. He will do that. He will use us to point the way to God. I find great hope in this. I find great purpose in life that God has us here in this nation for such a time as this. Let's use our opportunity. In the midst of Israel's decline, while they were on a slippery slope and sliding, Isaiah preaches that God is their protector. So in the midst of the decline of the nation, Isaiah is saying, God can protect us. God will protect us. He'll protect us if we turn to Him. So look with me in verse 4. Chapter 31, verse 4. For thus hath the Lord spoken unto me, like as the lion and the young lion roaring on his prey. When a multitude of shepherds is called forth against him, he will not be afraid of their voice, nor abase himself for the noise of them. So shall the Lord of hosts come down and fight for Mount Zion and for the hill thereof. Now Isaiah is trying to encourage his people. He knows their nation is in decline. He knows there's formidable problems in the nation, but he's trying to encourage the people. And the encouragement is, there is a God, and God will protect. Now, he later encourages them to turn to this God, so God will act. But here's the picture he paints. There is a lion, and this lion kills a sheep. And when the lion kills a sheep, the shepherds in the area, they band together. The shepherds band together, and they're coming after the lion. The lion protects its dinner and fights for its meal and fights for its pride. Okay, that's the picture. There was a lion that killed a sheep. The shepherds in the area, we got to get that lion. So the shepherds band together. They're going to go kill that lion. And that lion is there over its prey that it's killed. That's dinner for itself and for its pride. And the lion is not afraid of the shepherds. And it's going to defend its own. Now, in this picture, the lion is God. Put that in your notes. God is the lion. The shepherds are the Assyrians. The Assyrians that are banding together, growing more powerful, and they're coming after Israel, or Judah, we'll call it. They're coming after Judah, but God is the lion, and He is the protector. And the prey, in the illustration, the prey is Judah. The prey is Mount Zion. It says that He's going to come down and fight for Mount Zion and for the hill thereof. Mount Zion, the city of Jerusalem. The lion, God, is going to protect them from the shepherds that are banding together, the Assyrians that are coming to try to fight. So what Isaiah is saying to Israel is, our answer is God. Our answer is God. Our resource is God. Assyria is powerful, but we have God. God is like a lion. He's not going to be afraid of the shepherds. He's not going to fear the Assyrians. He is going to stand over His prey, over Israel, and He's going to protect what belongs to Him. Illustration number 2. Look in verse 5. As birds flying, so will the Lord of hosts defend Jerusalem. Defending also, He will deliver it, and passing over, He will preserve it. Now, would you fill in your notes? God is like a bird. He's like a bird. As birds flying, so will the Lord defend. He'll defend Jerusalem. It's not the idea that birds have a lot of strength. The idea is that birds are up there. They're flying overhead. They see exactly what's going on. They have sharp eyesight, and they're elevated, and they're flying over, they're hovering over. They know exactly what's going on. Somebody's moving over here, He sees it. An army is coming, God sees it. He's like a bird overhead. You know, in modern warfare, he who wins the sky wins the battle. That's the way warfare is today. when two nations fight, they try first to secure control of the skies. Because if you can control the skies, you can control the battle. It's called air supremacy in military parlance. Air supremacy is a position in war where a side holds complete control of air warfare and complete control of power over its enemy. And if you're going to be exact, there's 3 levels of this control of the air. Air supremacy is the highest level. A nation tries to get complete air supremacy. They're in complete control of the skies. The next level down, if they can't achieve that, the next level down is called air superiority. And what that means is they have a favorable position over their opponent. They mostly control the skies. They may not fully control the skies, but they have air superiority. The next level down, the third level, is air parity. That's the lowest level of air control, air parity. And what that is they control the airspace over their armies and over their troops and over their nation. But your opponent, their opponent, they control the air over their army and over their country. And it's air parity. So this side has its control, this side has its control. Now there are a couple of other stages below, and here's what they're called. Air denial. And then lastly, air incapability. If this nation has air supremacy, they have complete control. This one over here has air incapability. They can't do anything in the air. They've lost control of the air. So one is the inverse of the other. If it's parity, they both control over their own territory. But they're seeking air supremacy. You know when Israel fought in the 1967 war? 6-Day War? 6-Day War. A war that took 6 days. And before the war started, the Jordanians moved their tanks and their troops right up to the Jordanian-Israeli border. And the Syrians came down and moved right up to the Syrian-Israeli border. And the Lebanese came to the border. And Egypt came to the Sinai, right to the Egyptian-Israeli border. And Iraq, that didn't specifically border Israel, brought troops up to the border. So here's the little nation of Israel, and they look north, they look east, they look south, they look southwest, and all these nations around them brought up their armies and their tanks and their weaponry right up to Israel's border. Now, what would you do if you were Israel? Would you be nervous? Oh, Israel was nervous. This was a show of aggression like they had never seen before. And in a strategic, preemptive strike, the day before the armies attacked them, Israel launched their air force, and in hours they destroyed the air force of the Egyptians and the air force of the Jordanians and the air force of the Syrians and their airfields, and most of those nations didn't even get a plane off the ground. And in the first hours of the war, Israel had air supremacy. And at that point, they could control the war. And it only took them 6 days to defeat 5 nations because they controlled the skies. So what? What's the point, folks? Here's the point. With God, we don't have air parity. With God, we have air supremacy. He's not just an advantage. God is the victor. He will win. And God told Isaiah what he was going to do to the Assyrians. Look in chapter 31, verse 8. Here's what he said. Then shall the Assyrian fall with the sword, not of a mighty man, and the sword, not of a mean man or merely a man, shall devour him. But he shall flee from the sword, and his young men shall be discomfited or shall be forced into labor. The Assyrian was going to fall with the sword, but it wasn't going to be the sword of man. It was going to be the sword of the Lord that defeated the Assyrian and delivered Israel. If you read the historical interlude in the middle of the book of Isaiah, which is chapters 36, 37, 38, 39, it gives you the historical account of what's being said here. Right in the middle of Isaiah, he just gives a big history lesson. This is what happened. Sennacherib and his army, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, marched down from Assyria. And they came right down into Judah, kingdom of Judah. When they got down near Judah, back up. Yeah. You see right here? Sennacherib brings his army down right here, and then he splits his army. And he sends a small detachment down through the middle of Israel, and then the main bulk of his army continues down the coastline. And so here's the detachment that comes down through the middle. They're on their way to Jerusalem right here. The rest of the army comes down the coast, all the way down to Lachish, and defeats all of these cities down here. And then they're going to come up to Jerusalem. That's what's happening village after village when the detachment came down through the middle of Israel. Village after village. And you have all these little names of villages here. They defeated village after village. They're coming down to Nob. Nob. And when they got to Nob, they waited there. Have you ever been to Israel? Anybody here ever been to Israel? Oh, good. 1, 2, 3, 4, several of you. If you are in Jericho, which is over on the Jordan River over here. If you're in Jericho and you go from Jericho to Jerusalem, you travel along the Jericho Road. Same Jericho Road that Jesus gave the parable about the Good Samaritan, and he goes down to Jericho on the Jericho Road. But right now, it's a super highway from Jericho up to Jerusalem. And Jericho is below sea level. I think it's like 600 feet below sea level. And Jerusalem's up in the Judean highlands, about 2,800 feet in elevation. So you're climbing like this to go from Jericho up to Jerusalem. And when you get near Jerusalem, you come over the Mount of Olives. You crest over it. When you crest over the Mount of Olives, you're looking down on the city of Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem as a city sits on Mount Zion, but the mountain is of lower elevation than the Mount of Olives. And when you're really coming over the Mount of Olives, you're actually on what's called Mount Scopus, where Hebrew University is at. And you look down on Israel. When you're on Mount Scopus, looking down on Israel, you are in the vicinity of Nob. You're at Nob. Old Testament Nob. The Assyrians came down to Nob, and when they got down to Nob, they held up, and they're looking down. The Assyrian army, the detachment's looking down on the city of Jerusalem. The larger Assyrian army has gone down the coastline and conquered those cities. And there's a guy by the name of Rabshakeh, the Syrian general, and he's sent up. He's sent up to Jerusalem. Now, you got this map on your handout? Would you write this in? Would you write Nob right up here and Rabshakeh down here? This is important for us to understand. The Assyrian detachment is up here on Nob looking down on the city. Rabshakeh is down here, and he comes up from the south. And what you have is Jerusalem is caught in a pincer movement. It's what it's called, a pincer movement. The armies have surrounded them. You got Hezekiah, he's inside the walls of Jerusalem. The people are inside the city. They're afraid. And Isaiah sends a message to Hezekiah the king. And he says, Hezekiah, don't worry about it. God will deliver us. Now, if we were Hezekiah, I think we'd be saying, yeah, easy for you to say. Yeah, I'm the king. Everybody's looking to me. He's in a difficult position. He's got a tough decision to make. Rabshakeh is yelling over the city wall, demanding that he surrender. So here's Hezekiah's decision. I can surrender and be deported, and I'll probably never see my family again. My family will probably be scattered all over the Assyrian Empire. That's what they did. Or I can choose not to surrender. I can stay and fight. And if we lose, the Assyrians are the most brutal people. They're the most brutal army. When they came down here, or down south into Lachish, and Lachish didn't surrender, well, the Assyrians defeated them, and they took all of the leaders and cut off their heads and put the heads on poles and planted the poles outside the city gate so everybody could see how brutal they were. And do not defy the armies of Assyria. They built fear into people. And Hezekiah, he's got a decision to make. If he doesn't surrender and he loses his life, his family's probably tortured, and they lose their life, and much of his people. It's a difficult decision. Everything that he can see tells him to listen to Rabshakeh. Here's what he sees. He sees the military might of Assyria. Isaiah, who's saying, don't surrender. Isaiah has no military at all. The Assyrians, there's physical proof. The armies are right there. He just looks over the wall. He sees them. But Isaiah, he has spiritual strength. He doesn't have an army, but he has spiritual strength. He has faith in God. Rabshakeh is a present physical danger. Isaiah, you know what Isaiah has? He has the promise of deliverance. Now Hezekiah, he hears Rabshakeh and he hears Isaiah, and he's got a decision to make. This is not an easy decision. Have you ever heard the saying, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush? You ever use that saying? A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush? If you got a bird in your hand, at least you got one thing. That's better than the promise of two birds that are still in a bush. You might catch one of those birds. You might catch both of those birds, but you might not catch either bird. So a bird in the hand is a sure thing. Two in the bush, well, that's iffy. Yeah. Isaiah, he could see the army, and Hezekiah could see the army, and Isaiah had a promise. Listen to this. This is really interesting. It comes out of another passage in Isaiah. Behold, the Lord of hosts, shall lop the bow. Talking about the Assyrian king. He's going to lop the bow with terror, and the high ones of stature, that's the Assyrian leaders, shall be hewn down. The haughty shall be humbled. You know what God said he was going to do? I'm going to lop the king at Nob. That's what God said. I'm going to lop the king at Nob. And so I brought a devotional one time. Lopped at Nob. Lopped at Nob. God said, trust me. Isaiah said, trust God. And God says, I'm going to lop him at Nob. And so, here's what God does. He dispatches one angel to come down. And what does one angel do to the Assyrian army? Yeah. The next morning, when Hezekiah woke up, 185,000 Assyrian soldiers lay dead on the mountainside, lay dead in the valley. One angel from God destroyed the entire Assyrian army. Now, folks, that is what you call air supremacy. Right? That is air supremacy. That is God. That is how powerful God is. We can't visualize the horror of it. Now, this is the German army that died in Russia from the cold. We don't see the pictures, so we can't visualize the horror of what was outside those walls of Jerusalem. Shake your fist in God's face, Assyrians, and you will learn that God is powerful. He is our resource. God is in control. He's the God that you serve at First Baptist Church. He's the same God. He's a loving God. He sure is. And He wants to do marvelous things in your church. And He wants to do marvelous things in your life. And He wants to do marvelous things in your family. And He can do it. He is our resource. And He is powerful. And He's active. He's active in our lives, and He's active in your church. And folks, it's our responsibility as God's people to walk with Him and to talk with Him and to take Him with us. Wherever we go, you take God. He is your resource. He's going to be your resource at home. He's going to be your resource at work. He's going to be your resource no matter what task you're facing. And if you're walking with God, if I'm walking with God, He will help us. He is in control of our lives. He can do anything He wants to do because He's God. And when it comes to discipleship, a discipler takes a Timothy and tries to help a Timothy walk with God, because that new Timothy, that new Christian, needs God as his resource, as her resource. We're not your resource. Pastor Shipe is not your resource. You're not your disciples' resource. God is the resource. We're just taking them and trying to point them to God. And a pastor is trying to point his people to God, because God can go with those people wherever they go. He's the answer to your family, your church. He's the answer to your nation. And God puts all this stuff in the Bible because He wants us to read it. Why did God tell us all about Sennacherib and Hezekiah and Isaiah and the battle and 185,000 Assyrians dead the next? Why does God put that in here? Because God wants us to know what He can do, what He has done, what He will do as far as being our resource, helping us. Is your faith in Him? Do you love Him? Is His work your delight? Is His holiness your passion? How is it with you and God? Isaiah was the voice of one in Israel. You know what Israel needed? A whole lot more than one voice. They needed a whole host of voices talking about God. You know what America needs? A whole host of God's children talking about God and pointing people to Him. He is the resource that we go to. When we don't tell people, or we don't tell enough people, we end up with a nation that doesn't know the Lord. That's what Isaiah had, a nation that didn't know the Lord. That is a problem for us all when a nation doesn't know the Lord. America needs to know God. Let's tell them, one by one, wherever we go, let's represent Him well. And let our life and our lips tell people about the God that can help them. He is their resource if they turn to Him. I put in your notes the poem Others, because this is exactly the way we live, or should. Lord, help me to live from day to day in such a self-forgetful way that even when I kneel to pray, my prayer shall be for others. Yeah. Help me, Lord, in all the work I do to ever be sincere and true, and know that all I do for You must needs be done for others. Let self be crucified and slain and buried deep, and all in vain may efforts be to rise again, unless to live for others. And when my work on earth is done, and my new work in heaven begun, may I forget the crown I won, while thinking still of others. Others, Lord, yes, others, let this my motto be. Help me to live for others, that I may live like Thee. Hearing you sing this morning encouraged my heart. God has His people in this country. Let your light shine. Love people. God is your resource. Let people know that. Point them to Him. He wants to be their resource too. Let's bow our heads in prayer. Father, we are humbled that You would even use us. We need You, God. We need to know You. We need to love You more. And God, we stumble too much. We falter along the way because we're weak. And there's so many times that the Spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. God, I pray that you would empower your people. I pray that every man and woman and boy and girl from the depths of their heart would love you, would desire to walk with you, would turn to you in their darkest hour and turn to you when the sun is shining bright, and find in you humbly the resource. And Lord, I pray that you would accomplish your perfect will in our lives. May we use the very short period of time that you put us on this earth. May we use it for you. We ask for your strength. We ask your forgiveness when we fail you. And I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.